As I moved closer and closer to reading the scriptures Mervyn and others gave me, I began to feel a conviction come over me, albeit not a strong one. I was dealing with two issues simultaneously, being my discovery of a new reality and getting to grips with the fact that what I and many others viewed as normal life was actually said to be a state of rebellion and disobedience against God. Naturally and logically, I was conflicted and entered that gray area called neutrality. I learned that God's way is found in His Word, the Bible. The world's way is what we are taught from birth and is often labeled as secularism. Now, many times these two clash and they have stark opposite views of how life should be lived. Now, since school and education focused on getting us ready for careers and professions so that we can morph into the economic mainstream, no one has ever taught us how to live life and according to whose standards and rules. Church and religion tried at times, but the dominance of the secular system often infiltrated their thinking so that the difference between these two ways of living were quite negligible. I had already come to the conclusion that neither could answer the many questions I had at the get-go, and the even more I had now that I started to think critically. Perhaps I was sensing that the gospel was opening my eyes slowly to see things as they really are, or at the least as the believers of the world said they were. Whichever it was, one night whilst pondering on these issues, I decided to do the most foolish thing and ask God some questions. Now, I didn't even know if this was allowed, or if so, how it should be done, etc., etc. In other words, I had no clue what the protocol was in speaking to God. But I was doing my best to bypass the religious and church views on the issues because they painted God as aloof, distant, and quick to anger. He was portrayed as somewhat of a tyrant whom you dared not ask anything nor question. But I needed to know the following. So I stepped into unknown territory and said, God, you ask a lot of a young man when you say, leave everything and follow me. Although I was in a financial dip at the time because of some legal issues and could not travel to earn my keep, I pretty much saw it as a temporary setback, one that I would bounce back from. The preceding 4 years had been good to me as my import-export cross-border business flourished unimaginably. I had a blue-chip client in a neighboring state who gave me great support and believed in me. I had come a long way from the repair center at Protea Technology, where I was the data capture clerk, booking in Hewlett-Packard computers for repairs in 6th Street, Wynberg of Johannesburg. My income shot up dramatically by focusing on office automation equipment, as I went from earning 1,350 Rand per month at the time to bringing in between 15 and 25,000 in the first 6 months, and then moved up to 50 to 75,000 after that trip. I had found my niche in supplying big clients excellent products, giving them great service and keeping the technicians up to date on new equipment. I made sure that a promise I made was one that I kept. I also quite enjoyed the process of looking for foreign currency on the black markets in neighboring states and buying American dollars, British pounds, Danish kroner, and whatever else I could lay my hands on. It was exhilarating, as was walking into a South African bank to change that much money as a young black man during apartheid. That gave me a sense of power. I spent most of my time on the N1 between Johannesburg and Harare in Zimbabwe before venturing wider to include Lusaka in Zambia and Lubumbashi in Congo. Every second week I would drive up a road in what were some of my most memorable moments. So I was not doing too bad at all for a single young man of what I liked to call reasonably good looks. Of course, I am now wiser and know better. So although I was now back to working for someone and had spent most of my savings on riotous living and legal fees, it was still a lot to ask me to leave this life I was living and to follow somebody who said he was God. So I felt justified to ask God the following questions. I said, God, where did you come from? And how come you got all the power? I said, what happened to the people who were with you there, wherever you were? Who are they? My last question, I said, you ask a lot of a man when you say he must leave the only way of life he has known, leave his favorite cask of beer and love of the good life to follow someone he hasn't seen and hardly knew existed a few months before. Why should I do this, God? Now maybe someone else would have had a different approach and gone to their religious or church leaders, but I felt something inside me nudging me closer to go direct. Now I'm not sure if my questions were rhetorical or if I expected a response, but I was very serious when I wanted to know these answers. This was my life we were talking about. The next day when I saw Glenda and Mervyn, I told them what I had done and was eager to hear their responses, as they knew more than me about the Christian life and the Bible. She was taken by my direct approach and laughed at what she called your craziness. Mervyn, on the other hand, smiled as if he was a Mr. Kiyagi, expressing a moment of pride in his protege's progress. He said, so you better prepare for a visitation, dream or vision, because God will respond in His time. I was both excited and a little fearful. My mind said to me, what have you gone and done now, Mr. Big Mouth? Everything went on as per normal over the next week. I was discovering more scriptures and decided to practice them in real life and in real time. You see, I had learned that quoting these verses in the Bible when faced with a situation can solve whatever dilemma you were facing as long as you believed. I was told to read the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 23, and confirmed it when it said, Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. In the story, a man came to Jesus and requested some help. He said, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. The words, if you can, did not sit right with Jesus. He responded with a mild rebuke and some direction, saying, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. In other words, nothing is a matter of if. God can. God can. I was like, yeah, this is the first scripture I will target. If it's true, and we shall soon see. A little bit of the cynicism I had at the get-go stuck its ugly head out again. I didn't feel too proud of myself, given what I had been learning over the past months. So the next day I found myself in a small town on the East Rand, where the then apartheid police specialized in targeting black motorists who were driving smart cars coming through the town. Apparently that made you a suspect in something or other. Those small towns out in the countryside are still the same in many ways. Yeah, I came around a bend as you entered this one-horse town, and as per normal, the young white traffic officer came sprinting out from behind the tree to signal that I stop immediately. I'm not sure, but I could have been over the 60-kilometer speed limit because the Honda Ballard DOHC I was driving was a nippy ride. I slowed down and stopped. In and on the spot he pointed out behind the yellow lane. Very important. 1 decimeter out of it, and that's a ticket. Morning, the officer greeted sternly. I responded cheerfully while silently quoting another one of my favorite scriptures, Isaiah 54 verse 17, which said, no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. I'd recently learned all these few scriptures, and I intended putting them to the test. My thinking was, if the Bible is true, these things should work, because if they don't, I don't have time for fairy tales and fables. So whilst he was getting his fine book out to read me the Riot Act, I quickly repeated these verses again as he came walking towards my car, full of the bravado these racist cops had when dealing with black people. He stopped for a second just before he got to me, and went back to check some apparatus which he shook a few times before returning to my car. You are a lucky bugger, he said. I'm sure you exceeded the speed limit, but my camera is suddenly stuck, frozen, and can't give me the reading I wanted to show you. I was gobsmacked, because even in the absence of the camera's evidence, apartheid security bodies did not care two hoots about black rights and would normally have written a speech flying out and done so gleefully. But this one broke into a wide smile, saying, "You can proceed, mister. It's your lucky day." I had no idea at what was happening on the roadside outside Bethel. The traffic officer's remarks were the furthest thing on my mind as I pulled away slowly and rejoined the sparse traffic. I felt a cold surge run down my shoulders into my spinal area. It was as if someone was saying, "Scripture works, see?" I could feel the lump in my throat develop as I fought to hold back the tears. I absorbed the whole incident and replayed it in my mind before I got to my first client of the day. I had great difficulty understanding that saying or quoting a scripture can change your reality. Frankly stated, I was too shocked at what I had just seen. The officer looked in a daze, and it was probably the first time I saw an apartheid traffic cop smile ever. Calling me Mr. instead of Kaffer was also a shock. I sat in the car at the parking lot where my first client of the day had his shop, and that lone tear that I always battle in futility, won again as it rolled down my face. Scripture had passed its first test, annihilated my doubts and misconceptions. It was 1-0 to Scripture. I grudgingly considered defeat, perplexed at what I had just witnessed. It was surreal. But it had to happen again. I'm not that easily convinced.